Alexa, tell me about battles with bits of rubber.
I don't know that one.
So this is an unusual one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an unusual one in that we're actually face to face for once.
It has been a while. It's been since Monsterpalooza.
Yeah, 2018. Which was April 2018,
last year.
Yeah.
So over a year.
That's when I moved. I moved house that month. So yeah. Oh goodness.
And before that, it was 6 years.
Yes. That I was here.
2013 was the last time you were here.
Yeah, which is Colorado, in case anyone didn't realise. You'll hear crickets in the background. And
maybe a few hawks were sitting out by my koi pond, so you hear water. It's a little fountain in the pond.
And there were hawks. We were a family of hawks flying around, which was fascinating, actually, with a massive wingspan.
But it's twilight, and they may be getting ready to bed down. But it's a beautiful evening. It's probably 70. Feels great.
Good, nice temperature.
Yeah. It's been a fun couple of days.
It has.
It's gone really, really fast.
Yeah. Well, we still got all of tomorrow. It's Thursday today, and then tomorrow's Friday. I fly back in the evening. But we've been making ear molds.
Yes, we did cores, and then we sculpted some nice pointy ear tips, and been putting the molds together and finishing touches on them in the morning.
And shot some video as well. So we shot all that on video so we can use that for an article we're planning for Prosthetics magazine.
Yeah, so there will be a tutorial coming on that, and we've been using some really fun products. I've become a real devotee of Smooth-On's freeform air epoxy dough, though there are several companies that make it. But it's just there's a company called AdTech that makes it. I've used it. It's got a great reputation, but it's really stinky compared to the freeform air,
which doesn't smell at all.
Which doesn't smell at all.
It smells like a warm biscuit.
Yeah.
As Kellogg would say. So I thought it would be quite an interesting thing to chat about the mold making process with regards to the two main kinds of resin, because I do a lot of stuff, or have done a lot of stuff in the past with polyester, which makes very nice lightweight molds, very nice and thin, but they typically are just stinky. It's a stinky material.
Yeah, you really need ventilation and a respirator. You certainly couldn't do it in the house.
No. And I know that there are certain, you still get fumes with epoxy, but the fact is, if you wear a mask and you have good ventilation, your neighbours don't know that you're doing it. Whereas if you do the smallest polyester mould, you could take care of yourself perfectly well and extract and everything, so your house is fine.
But everybody will know what you're doing.
Yeah, it stinks, and it's just horrible. And it's one of those persistent smells. Like if you have worked in a workshop and you got your backpack in the corner of your coat or whatever, that will stink for days afterwards, even though it was nowhere near it. It just kind of absorbs the smell.
Yeah.
And just smells like you're cooking crystal meth or something. So
and it's not good. It can't be good for you.
No, the fumes are heavy, but they really, really smell terrible. So it's been quite nice to make the molds. So I just thought we'd have a quick chat about what you wanted these molds to be, because it's a system, I guess, that you used a lot. And we were chatting about how we seem to have in the UK a lot more polyester molds per se. And I keep hearing from people saying that in the States you get a lot less polyester mold. Also, a lot of people don't even realise you can use fiberglass for molding. They doubt that it can pick up the detail, because I think other things have been used instead, so it's kind of looked down upon. But you can do some nice molds with it, but it's still
another bit is that UK polyester resins have a reputation for being better than the polyester resins that are available in the States.
Just because I
don't know why.
I have a feeling it's to do with the amount of boats, because the UK being a small island nation.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of marine work. A lot of boat repairs, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of fishing, or there has been historically. So I think since fiberglass has been used, I mean, obviously people weren't building it out of fiberglass 500 years ago, but I mean, it's a fairly recent thing. But because there's so much boating and boats to repair and stuff. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of polyester, or reasons to have good polyester, because there was a demand for it in the industry.
Well, it certainly makes sense. I remember as a kid watching guys in surf shops laying up polyester resin and fiberglass cloth to make surfboards.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And they sand it smooth. So they
sand it smooth. So they'd get the foam shaped nicely, and then they'd do several layers of polyester and the fiberglass cloth to give it the strength.
Yeah.
And lightweight.
Yeah. Well, I've got some interesting video that I shot a while back making a head out of epoxy, because I've started to really enjoy that polyester, the epoxy gel coat that Smooth on make.
Oh yeah, it's lovely. It stays right where you put it.
Yeah, it's like a creamy but not thick kind of, but it's a grey, nice and light.
And it goes off pretty quickly. It doesn't have any smell noticeably either. I mean, if you put your face right down in it, it's got an odor, but it's not overpowering like polyester.
Yeah, which is really hummy. But what you do have here in the States is a lot more. I mean, maybe not so much now, because I guess more people use epoxy, but you have a lot of good gypsum deposits within the geology of the country. So you end up with a lot more stuff like the UltraCal 30.
Yeah, I love working with UltraCal. It's still, I think, pretty much a go-to stone for doing molds. People use it a lot for foam latex, just because on one hand it's porous, so it'll absorb the moisture from the latex easily. It's great for doing slip latex masks because it's porous, it absorbs. What I've been doing for mask making is I'll do maybe a half inch, 3/4 of an inch of stone for my detail layer, maybe half inch, 3/4 is starting to get weight. And then once it goes off, I will back it with the freeform air, another half inch of that.
And it
bonds really well to the UltraCal. Mm-hmm. And then if you've got a full head mold for doing a mask, you can handle this mold easily, because it doesn't have the weight of, if you've got a 2-inch thick UltraCal mold, which is a great workout, but a little bit much on the back and arms if you're trying to manhandle this thing by yourself. Mm-hmm. But the freeform air makes it a piece of cake.
So the freeform air is basically like we shot video of this, but I'll just briefly describe it. It basically comes in two tubs, so it's a 2-part material, just like a lot of the resins and silicons. But it's like fluff. It's like mashed potato that's fluffy.
Like Play-Doh.
Yeah, like Play-Doh. Yeah, it's really nice and fluffy. You can dig your hand right in there, and then you just roll up a ball, you were saying like a baseball-sized lump of A and the same of B, and you just mix them together, and then you end up with this kind of fluffy, creamy, I'd say paste, but it's not sticky like paste is.
No.
You can take it out of your hand. It doesn't stick to everything. And it's not stringy, so you can put this on where you want it, roll up like we were doing in the
and it sticks to everything.
Yeah, it sticks to everything.
You can smooth it out with denatured alcohol, which is a lot less expensive than 99% IPA.
But you could use that.
You could use that for sure, but
try not to.
There's no need to. If you're pinching pennies, denatured's a lot less expensive.
Yeah. And
you can buy it in gallons in the paint department at Home Depot and Lowe's and any of the big box hardware stores.
Yeah.
It's used a lot as a camp stove fuel.
Yeah.
As a clean burning fuel.
I wonder if we have it at home. I'll have to see if we get it back home.
I'd be surprised if you don't have something similar,
Yeah.
if not the same thing. It might have a different name.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was just thinking about the different kinds of moulds, because when you're making sort of big things like a body, so you're moulding a body, you tend to not want a big heavy block of something. You want it quite flexible and lightweight. So you can imagine something like that, like a thin fiberglass. Well, I would call fiberglass. We should probably look at the terminology of that, because fiberglass is obviously the matting material itself, which you can use with epoxy and polyester. But in England, anyway, when people say fiberglass, they typically mean polyester and fiberglass or GRP, glass reinforced plastic.
That's what I think of when I hear it too. But when I think one of the benefits of using the fiberglass cloth or chopped fibers with polyester resin is the resin actually dissolves
Yeah, it breaks
the
it
glass.
down.
It breaks it down
Yeah.
so it becomes one and makes it a much stronger material.
Mm-hmm.
The epoxy doesn't do that, but if you're using chopped glass, it still works really well.
Yeah.
Because basically you just don't want your molds cracking when you're prying them open.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've given good thought to how you're making the mold to begin with, it's not gonna break when you open it. There's a method that I've been using since I learned it from Rob Freitas. Is my negative sits a little bit lower than the positive, so there's a lip around the mold that I can put strips of 1x2 wood, which is what I use, and make a hashtag shape. Mm-hmm. And then I have a little lip handle, and we can show photographs of this too. I've showed it in the book, and it's been in, I think, Prosthetics magazine. But I'll use a C-clamp then on both ends of the mold and twist it at the same time, and it just lifts the positive out of the negative. There's no torque on it at all, and it just makes everything. If there's suction, just let it get a little tight. Don't force it, because eventually the suction will release on its own. Mm-hmm. But then everything just lifts right out of the mold, and if you've made it properly with no undercuts, it's a piece of cake.
What's nice about doing it that way is it lifts the mold from the place it's supposed to come, because if you try using a screwdriver, for example, because of the angle, we'll have to do some cross-section drawings, I think, illustrations to show how this looks, but if you were to try and use a screwdriver to pry that, it would probably just break your mold or your core.
Yeah, well, because you're applying a lot of torque.
Yes,
but it's in one spot. But if you're lifting from both ends straight up at the same time.
But it's also the wrong place to prise it, because you need to be underneath. I mean, on a flatter mould it would work, maybe, but for something like that works really well. So that's definitely something. So you can get that kind of thing with more blocky moulds. It's kind of weird, because I'm trying to think of something like small, like if you had a nose and you were going to make, say you had no money, you were doing it just in plaster, so you made your nose core, you sculpted on it, you made your mould in plaster. You probably do what's known as a block mould, what I call a block mould. So you pour it as a solid block of plaster, maybe some scrim or burlap reinforcement in that, and it's just basically a block. And then when the mould's set up, you could pop it open, clean it out, and put it back together. You know, the way you close the mould is to literally put the negative into the positive, and it'd be filled with silicone or foam, whatever you're going to use to make your piece. And then you either clamp it or put a strap on it or put weight on it, and it's a very easy way of closing that mould. If you were to make obviously a full body the same way, it would be using a huge amount of material. It would be unwieldy, it'd be too heavy. You couldn't get
the likelihood of breaking it is...
Yeah, and if you drop it's going to smash or
going up,
kill someone. So it's too heavy. So you would end up making a big mould out of a thinner material. And that thin material could be polyester resin, if you want to use that, or it could be epoxy, laminated with that, or it could be a sort of a material like freeform air, where maybe the surface is done with a gel coat, so it has a resin gel coat, but then the thickness of it really is made up of something else which is rigid, but cool. It's rigid, but it's also thin and lightweight, so it's still not massive. You can still bolt it, but it keeps its shape.
What you do is you basically you're building it up, you're laminating it in layers. You're starting out with a gel coat layer, which is maybe a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch thick.
You brush that on first. That captures all the detail.
First to capture all the detail. Yeah. Then a layer of laminating resin, whether it's polyester or epoxy, with chopped glass or cloth in it. Maybe 1 or 2 layers of that, and then you do a layer of the freeform air, the epoxy dough, 1/2 inch of that, and then once that's set up, 1 more layer of resin with chopped glass, and then a thin detail coat on top of that, because the glass can be a little needly and sharp if it wasn't smoothed out really, really well. Yep. You can either sand it, or I like to do a thin layer of the resin with Urethil 11 from Smooth On. It's almost like flocking. It's a urethane fine powder.
It's very similar, I think, to polyfibers.
Yeah,
Similar
it's
kind of product.
probably the same stuff. And you can thicken the resin so it brushes on and stays where you put it, because if you just go straight with it, then you're constantly brushing it up until it goes off. And if you've got other things to do, you don't want to be spending all your time brushing up resin on the mold until it kicks. So you add a little filler to it, brush it on, smooth it with some denatured alcohol, boom, your mold's done. All you got to do is open it up and clean the clay out.
I've been doing something a little bit hybridy in a way with some of my jackets. I should start by saying as well, we haven't done a podcast for ages, and so we should apologise for that. But the reason basically is because I've been on Dracula for 3 months and it's kicked my ass. There's been really long days.
There's stuff going on.
There's stuff going on, and it's been, well, frankly, it's been impossible to do anything. I've recorded quite a few, and we've chatted about a lot, and we've planned stuff, but we haven't actually... The trouble is it takes, like 2 days to really properly do a podcast, because we have to record it and then edit it, and then there's the notes to write up, and then there's photos to add to the notes. Then sometimes we have to wait for clearance if we've got a guest, because I like them to hear it before it goes out.
Yeah.
And if they sign off on that, then we can upload it to the host, and then it gets disseminated out from there. And it takes a while. It's a 2-day process, which is a full-time thing. Which,
and then life
you don't
gets
get paid
in the
for
way.
that. Yeah, life gets in the way. When you don't get paid for that, it's one of those things where if I'm working, I can't not do the job I've got to do. I'm getting paid for to do this. So
we apologise, but here we are.
We're back, and I haven't not wanted to do podcasts the whole time. I've not been doing. It's not like I got bored of it and didn't want to do it anymore. I fucking love doing this.
We talk about it all the time when we get the chance to talk. But we both had so much going on lately that shit happens.
Yeah. So anyway, we're back. Never really went away. It was just quiet.
Yeah.
On the podcast.
I'm just so glad we're getting a chance to hang face to face.
Yeah, man.
Last night was fun.
Yes, we had a few drinks and watched some TV. I got you in to watch Dairy Girls.
There are quotations on either side of few.
Yeah, well, I slept very well, let's put it like that. Yeah, I got you into Dairy Girls, hopefully, because you like that. That was
yeah,
awesome show on
I've got a new favourite show.
If you haven't seen it, it's worth checking it out. It's very funny. But it's on Netflix over here. I think it's on Channel 4 in England, but it seems to be Netflix around the world. But yeah, so I was saying with moulds, I've done jacket moulds. I've done in fiberglass. I'm kind of getting lazier in my old age. So what I've been doing is doing the gel coat to capture all the detail, get a nice surface. And then before I laminate my glass, what I do is I mix up all the resin I'm going to laminate with, which is usually a lot less catalyst, because obviously you need it to, not go off for an hour or two, because it takes longer to laminate it. I pour some of that into a cup, and I add I used to use, I think it was Robin Schooner that started off me with this, so I put talc in it. I got a big, 20 kilo bag of industrial talc, unscented talc. It's not particularly refined, but I put some scoops of that in and mix it in to turn it into a paste. Yeah. And I fill all the detail areas and around all the keys with that to basically make the surface a smoother surface to laminate. So when I'm glassing, it's a smoother surface to glass. You haven't got to go around each detail.
Yeah, it's as flexible as the cloth can be.
Yes, it's difficult.
It's still really tough to not get air pockets when you've got a 90-degree angle somewhere, or
or a deep area,
some deep area. And
so I've been doing that, but I also started
weakens
using
the mold.
The polyfibers instead. So I mix polyfibers in with the resin, fill in things. So before it's set, I then go over the top with more, but the same mix of resin, but there's no filler in that, and then the laminating glass. And because I filled all those deep areas,
then it looks
it's
great.
very quick to do. It makes it a little bit thicker in those areas, but that also makes it stiffer. But one thing I think you do get with polyester resins over epoxies, I think polyesters get quite hot. I'm sure epoxies
can get hot too.
But it happens to slower
the
process.
Thicker the laminating resin is, the hotter it will get. I mean, I've had some excess left over when I'm done brushing onto the mold surface in a little paper cup, and if it's half inch of the stuff, it'll start smoking when it gets hot, and it's toxic.
Yeah,
so you got that you got to make sure you've got room for those fumes to get out, because you'll be visiting your doctor pretty soon if you don't.
Yeah, nasty. Yeah, I mean, you've got the it's standard practice with polyester anyway, you typically have like a slops bucket that's half filled with water.
Yeah.
So you use your resin, and then when you've finished your job, whatever you've got left over, you scoop out and put that in the water, and it will go off underwater. But if you don't, it will just melt the bowl, because it will just get that hot.
Right.
It can melt through the bowl, and like you say, it can even ignite, and you can smell it. And the cool guy who's got a hot gauge on the go, because you can smell it in the workshop. This is like someone, usually like a sort of trainee, and their first day or whatever, they've mixed up and they just didn't think to put rid of it. Or
I think the epoxies are a little bit more expensive than polyester.
Yes. And they're slower as well. They take longer
slower,
to
the freeform air has a 24-hour cure. I mean, you can accelerate it with heat, but if you're doing your mold in pieces, like the ears that we're doing now, we've got the one-piece positive core, but we're doing the negative in two pieces, so we're ultimately having a three-piece mold. And if we wanted to accelerate the freeform air with heat, we'd run the risk of melting the monster clay underneath.
Yeah, the sculpt itself would get damaged.
And, it would probably be okay on the side that's already got some resin on it, because we've made that part of the mold, but the other side of the ear would just disappear.
Yeah.
And then you'd
Nasty
be
business.
back to square one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were making a one-piece mold, I guess it kind of wouldn't matter as much because it's already retained.
Yeah,
but this is the thing with
the
two-piece molds.
The gel coat's already set, and you've got your shape.
Yeah, you've got a responsibility to the other half of the mold, or the other halves, or other pieces. And as a mold maker, really nice guy called Brian Best, who was very, very, very good fiberglassing, and he had some very, very good. One of the things he did, which I think was really good, he would make a record of every mix he made. So if he was doing a head, he'd measure out what he figured was the right amount of resin, and then how much catalyst he used, the temperature, how long it took to cure on gel, all those kinds of things. And then he'd keep it in a book, and then when he had to do another full head, he knew how much he had, and he'd make a note of how much he had left over. So he ended up with this really good, dense compendium of like amounts of catalyst to use, because that's the other thing with polyester resin, there's variables of how much you can add.
Right.
So if it's a cold day, you can add more catalyst, or if you're going onto wet clay, for example, because wet clay is colder typically, and you want the resin to go off on it, sometimes you have to either accelerate the resin, or you can hairdryer it, stick a hairdryer, warm it up first before putting the catalyst in.
And that happens with epoxy too. I've noticed colder clay, it will
take longer
because
it's just colder.
Same thing happens with silicone.
Yes. Yeah. So it's one of those things, if you've done your edge, you might have a sculpt in plastiline, and then you need to put a dividing wall in it, but that dividing wall is in clay. One little trick is I will put the gel coat on the sculpt itself only, and then I put a bit more catalyst in, and then do the flange, the clay wall, with the same mix, but there's got a little bit more catalyst in it. But I haven't done that over the whole sculpt, because I don't want that to get too hot. So that's quite a nice little thing. He used to keep a list of all his amounts. I think it's a really good thing to get into the habit of recording, because what I do see a lot in some workshops, especially some of the bigger workshops, people will just mix up, they need some resin, they'll mix up, frankly, a shit ton more than they need, and then because it's not coming out of their pocket, they'll just bin the rest. They just pour it away when it's set up, and it's like, that's such a waste, and also you haven't really kept score of how much you've used and how much you've wasted, because the thing is, if you measure out 600 grams, find out you only needed 400 because there's 200 left over, well, next time you're moulding something of that size that you can use less resin, and when you're paying for your own materials, that's when it starts becoming a good thing to know, because it's a tragedy to throw away all that resin that you didn't need to mix up. And it's hard to estimate.
I have been there, I must admit.
Yeah.
I try to minimize those mistakes, but I do try to keep track of what I do.
Yeah. What do you think about mold closure as well? I mean, over here there seems to be a lot of strap action. A lot of people using straps to close up molds. I have
straps, but I never use them.
You prefer weights?
I use. It depends on the mold.
Yeah.
For some of my foam molds, I will use weights. Some of them I can clamp shut. Depends on if there's enough room on the flange for clamping to work. If not, I've got weights from a sporting goods store that I'll just lay up on top, and once the stuff gels or kicks in, depending on what the material is, then I can lift the weights off and pop it in the oven, or if it's done, open the mold.
Yeah, because I remember, typically a lot of the smaller molds or the block molds, I would always use like, you know, a C clamp or a G clamp. But I've started to use a lot more F clamps. Have you seen those? They're like similar to a G clamp. They're probably called something different here, but they're basically like it slides on a longer neck, almost like a sash clamp.
Yeah.
But smaller. So you could have a mold, you know, and then you have a 6 or 7 inches that you can tighten up with that has a screw thread, but you can slam it down quickly to close the mould and then tighten it to finish off. But they typically have, and unfortunately that is what it's called, it has a deeper throat. So I asked for deeper throat clamps because it means the centre of the clamp is in the middle of a mould. So if you've got a mould that's 12 inches across, you need the throat of the clamp to be at least 6 inches to get to the middle of the mould. Otherwise it'll be levering only on one side, which means it'll only lift, you know, push down on one side, which may lift it on the other. So you may end up using more than one clamp, which is why I think maybe the straps are quite good.
Well, we'll try to show some pictures of that too. I've got some stuff in the newest edition of my book that uses straps, because sometimes straps are a pain in the ass, because they have to go underneath the mold. And which means you have to lift the mold and get the strap underneath it, and it's
tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky, especially to do it by yourself. You know, sometimes you need 4 hands instead of just 2.
Yeah, especially if you've got something like a time-sensitive material, like it's a hot day and the foam's gelling or the silicon's starting to go off. And one thing I noticed on some molds I made is they were epoxy, so they were smooth on the outside, and then trying to tighten up the strap, and the strap would just slide off. So I realised what I should have done is made some kind of indentation or some kind of retaining leg or something to hold the strap in place.
Well, what I've got in the book is essentially that kind of thing that holds. It leaves a channel under the mold for the strap to go through, so it will come around on the top and strap down nicely. So it gives you something to force it down, so that you're not just haphazardly catching an edge here and an edge there. You're getting the full use of the strap.
Well, I think the straps are probably good for bigger molds, especially because, like a chin or a nose, which is, you know, maybe the core is maybe 6 or 7 inches across. That's easily closed by a clamp evenly, I think. But if you've got like an arm, for example, say you've got an arm from elbow to fingertips, you know, it's maybe 2 feet long. If you just put a clamp in the middle of that, there's a good chance a lot of that pressure isn't going to make it all the way to the fingertips or all the way to the elbow. So you'd want maybe 3 or 4 points of pressure. And with thin fiberglass molds, because they're thin and they're flexible, you had to kind of bolt them at, regular 2-inch or 1.5-inch intervals around the outside, which was laborious, but it did mean that you got very tight pressure, evenly around the edge. But
which gives you a much, almost very little seaming involved.
Yes, because even if the mold's slightly out, you can, in theory, pop it back in the oven, soften it with heat, put the bolts in, tighten them up, and it will kind of cool down, and it's always able to be moved. Right. Whereas a lot of epoxy molds, I find what's good about them is they're very accurate because they're stable, they don't flex. But if they're slightly out and they don't flex, it also means you can't kind of fix it.
Right.
So, but the good epoxies tend to be very accurate, but they're slower as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I say, I could do probably a 2 or 3 piece fiberglass mould in a day quite easily using polyester. Whereas if I was doing it with epoxy, you could probably add at least another 2 days on top of that.
Absolutely.
To let it fully cure properly.
It's not something you need. You want to do if you're in a hurry.
Yeah. Which is a shame, but I think that's often why. I think that's probably why, because things can be done with polyester. It's quick, so it does. I also think, actually, weirdly, the polyester resin gets used a lot from the old school construction guys who used to make a lot of sets and they'd make sections of things. I think fiberglass got used a lot for molds or mold jackets for things. And so I remember one of the first movies the first movie I worked on was Mary and Riley, and the mold room was full of like union old school construction plasterer mold maker guys that were familiar with the material fiberglass and the polyester resin. So they were the ones making the molds. But what I found was a lot of them didn't come at it from a prosthetic-y point of view. So if they were making very detailed things, or things where the difference between a thickness of an edge that was a piece of paper, which to your eyes super critical, wasn't of concern to them because they didn't think in those kind of more refined ways. So in a way, it's almost like it feels like a lot of fiberglass moulds have been used because there were a lot of people doing it, so we got good at doing it, and it was familiar, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing to use. Whereas I think, the epoxy stuff seems to have come out of, I think Weta were one of the first people to use it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I'm sure I'll get corrected. But I remember how a lot of people that were working on Lord of the Rings stuff were saying they use syntactic dough for almost everything over there. It was just like, I don't know if that was true or not, but it just seemed like a lot more people started to use it from then on. And I started using it on Game of Thrones. I think was the first time I ever used it, like 4 years ago, for a mould. And since then I've started using it a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure how. I've been using it for a while. I don't remember exactly when I started using it.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like if I was going to do what I would have done with a block mould, I would happily do it with something like freeform air now.
Yeah.
And make something that's maybe 3/4 of an inch thick.
Well, it's so freaking easy to use.
Yeah, and then just strap it closed. Yeah. I mean, I used straps for my IMAX demo this year for the first time. It's the first time I'd ever used straps for myself for my own moulds. I fucking loved it. Really, really well. I just realised you have to get a purchase on how to tie it, because it wasn't a ratchet strap. It was one that was like a luggage strap that you pull tight.
Yeah,
but you could really get some leverage on it.
Once you figure out how those work, that's another reason I don't really like the straps. Is I can't figure out how the fuck they work.
Yeah, the ratchet ones are good, but then the danger with the ratchet ones is you can over tighten them.
Yeah,
and then obviously if you do over tighten it with a flexibly kind of mold like thin fiberglass, you might buckle it or bend it so it'd be a thick edge in one place.
Or, God forbid, crack it.
Or crack it, yeah, you may go, because a lot of people do like to really tighten it, and then, boom, especially plaster, or something solid like a block, it's possible to actually break the mold.
They're not really repairable.
No, not really.
Not to a point where somebody's not going to notice it.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking about Brian Best. I learned collapsible cores from the stuff that he gave me for the first edition of my book on collapsible hand cores, and now that's how I'm doing it. Though I'm now doing it as 3D printed parts, but
same principle.
I'm using the same principle, same essential shape, with the keys on how each piece fits together and stays there, so that you've got a solid core, but it will come apart really easily, saving your core and your prosthetic.
Yeah, although if it's not obvious what a collapsible core is, it's literally the core that you would sculpt on, and then you make your mold. You can in theory with some things have a one-piece mold, or at least a mold where you don't have many seams. I mean, one of the things I think is really good for collapsible cores is hands, because a hand is wider than a wrist. An open hand, because typically you're making a set of gloves or something for someone, the fingers have to be wide apart.
And you want to do it with the hand with the fingers spread as far apart as possible.
Yes, you can get in between to sculpt them.
You can get in between the fingers to get
the detail
that prosthetic and the detail.
Yeah, which then means the hand is like 10 inches across, but your wrist is like 3 inches wide. So how do you get that hand that's solid through that hole without ripping the glove?
Yeah.
So you make a collapsible core.
Yeah.
So
one of two things, or two things is going to happen. You're either going to trying to get that glove off the hand core. You're either going to break the fingers, tear the glove, or both.
Yeah.
And doing a collapsible core mold, it's also great for doing necks, full 360 necks, where you can inject it from the inside, and you do a collapsible core. Because you need to have the chin and the base of the head for the neck, but it has to be collapsible. Otherwise, you'd never be able to get the one piece negative off the head, because you want to inject from inside so you can have a seamless piece. Yeah. There's a seam on the inside, but nothing you'll see on the outside.
Yeah.
We should probably do a tutorial on collapsible cores at some point.
Yeah, they're one of those things.
What you're hearing is Black Hawk helicopters from the Air Force Base near my house.
They look very cool.
We get to see a lot of cool stuff flying around here.
Because the Air Force Base is
not just Hawks. Away? It's if that. We can hear I hear Reveille in the morning. I hear Star Spangled Banner and the flag lowering at 5 o'clock, and at 10 taps when it's lights out.
Let's try and see if we can hear that.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, I had a point to make and I can't think what it was. It'll come back to me.
Like about the cores?
Yeah. Oh,
core?
yeah. My thing about cores is I think they're essential for a lot of things. But one of the things is, like, I did it was for a chemotherapy makeup where this lady had lost her hair, and I had to make, a bald head for it, so it had to look completely natural and realistic. So clean, nice and clean. And I thought about collapsible cores, but I also thought about trying it as a front and a back piece that I could overlap. So what I ended up doing was I sculpted it obviously as one piece, floated it off, but I made a front, full head to the top of head, from the nose bridge to the top of the head.
Yeah.
That's the core on the front, and from the top of the head down to the nape of the neck on the back. And then I flared out the cores. So I made 2 flared out cores, which meant I didn't have to make a collapsible core. So the actual act of making collapsible cores can be quite time consuming, and depending on how you do it, because I've seen some people do them very successfully where they just bore up in sections, and others you actually have to sort of carve things out or make walls and pour it up in sections. So part of me feels like if you had a lot of pieces to run and it was a high profile thing that really needed it, it's totally worth doing it. But sometimes I think you can avoid doing collapsible cores by rethinking about how you can make your piece. And by having a front and a back piece, what it meant was I got a really nice tight fit, because I could slide one over the other. I could pull the back of the headpiece on and pull it forward, and I had somewhere to put my edges because it was going to be covered by the back piece. And because they were prosthetic blending edges, they were great edges, and I could, I had no trouble with it, and it worked really, really well.
Do you still have those molds?
I still have those molds, yeah. So they're worth it. Sometimes you don't need, and they were in fiberglass as well. Sometimes you don't need to make a collapsible core. So it would be interesting to look at how you could avoid. I avoided it for time issues, and because I wasn't confident enough to do it in the time I had. I'm sure someone, if you had a team of people, it was just me, so I didn't want to spend that time.
I think time is one of the biggest things to consider, because it takes a while.
Yeah. But collapsible cores are definitely worth looking at, and because they require you to anticipate what the finished piece is going to be. Because the thing is, if you could make something seamless by making a collapsible core, in theory it either reduces or completely removes the seams on the outside of that piece, which if you have to make 20 or 30 sets of something and it takes a day to seam it, you've committed 20 or 30 days of seaming. You've got to pay for that. Whereas if you could make a collapsible core in a week, that may take you 5 or 6 days, but that's 15 days less than all the seaming days.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So if you're paying your mould makers the same as you're paying your seamers, then it's a net gain, isn't it? It's a net gain there. So it's worth thinking about why to do things a certain way and not. Because I can imagine a lot of people would be like, well, if you don't need to do a collapsible core, why does anyone do it? So it all does depend on what it's for and whether you've got the time to do it and whether it's feasible, because some things can be collapsible, like whole heads are great as collapsible because that means you get your one piece out.
And if you've got the time and want to learn how to do it, do it.
Yeah.
Because it is a valuable skill.
There's not a lot of information out there, is it? It's probably quite closely guarded. I don't know if people are reluctant to let people know, or if it's one of those things that is, there's so much stuff you would have to know in order to do it well. Would it interfere? Do you know what I mean? Like, easily explaining, like, I'll get someone to ask me a very complicated question through Messenger or send me an email, and the answers I'm going to give will probably lead to more questions, so you end up sort of digging into a rabbit hole, and in a way you kind of get the impression that just because someone's heard of a collapsible core, they're probably not ready to make one yet. You know what I mean? Because it's quite involved and you could screw it up and it'd be a very expensive thing. But if you want to practice and do it,
they're
it's
also
kind of fun.
called puzzle molds, and some of them are like puzzles. They go together in a certain way and they have to come apart in a certain way or it won't work. Yeah. And Rob Freitas is the master at doing these complicated puzzle molds. And that's Donna calling.
That is an amazing message navigation. It's my favourite sound. It's awesome. It's one of those things. Sometimes I have seen collapsible cores beautifully made, and I thought to myself, I don't know how long that core took to make, but I could probably have done you a two-piece, and then you could have assembled those two pieces, and then pre-painted them still, or hair punched them still, but I could have made that much quicker. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not averse to them, but I tend to only do a collapsible core if I absolutely have to, which I'm sure is probably the case for any collapsible core that's been made. But
think through what you're doing. Don't. I think just because you can isn't the right answer for the reason to do something. Do it because it's the right thing to do for the project you have to complete.
Yeah.